Ladies and gentlemen, we're about 45 seconds late. If you could find your seats that our custodial staff worked so hard to put in place, we really would like you to use the seats. And then we'll get started in a moment. We brought an extra coat rack down as well. That includes my staff. If you could find your seats, thank you. Good morning, my name is Darren Watucky. I have the great honor and privilege of being the director of the Memorial Student Center. It is a very special day for this building and our department and our campus. At this time, I would like to introduce our Chancellor, Catherine P. Frank.
Hello, everybody. It's so nice to see you. Thanks for making time. It's a busy time of the semester. We're gearing up for the end of the semester, and so I appreciate everybody making the time to be here today for this special ceremony. So it's very appropriate that it's held today on Veterans Day. I just met with some prospective students, and I got to tell them the story of what is happening down here should they pass through this area of the MSC today. And I always enjoy being able to talk to them about our alumni. And so I'll talk to you a little bit about how I talked to them about today's event. So if you weren't aware, we have about 285 veterans and current military among our student body. And of our employees, we have approximately 36 employees, full-time employees who are veterans. And so we thank all of you, students and staff, for your service today and every day. And we are just delighted to have family members of Charles Cummings with us this morning. So in our front row here, we have great-great-nephew Chris Steensland and his father, Kirk, were able to be with us. And so if you just stand up and let people know who you are. And joining us remotely, I would like to just welcome Michael Steensland and Michelle Hampton and other extended family members who are able to join us virtually. And so I think I have the story correct, and it was a very strange text, right, that you all received. And I think it started with, this is not a joke, or this is not spam, when he received the text. Because Charles Cummings was recently discovered not only by Stout, but by his family. And so this is a new addition, right, to the family history, and it's certainly important to our family at Stout as we think about all of our students, all of our faculty and staff. So it's a really great story of discovery and recognition. And so in a moment, you'll hear more about the Hall of Heroes project, and you'll hear a little bit more about the discovery of Charles Cummings. And when I told students today, I was on the phone with one of our alums, Bob Janesco, who is graduated in the mid-1960s and is one of the Sigma Tau Gamma alumni who were instrumental in beginning this project of the Hall of Heroes. And I was talking to Bob about other things yesterday, because we chat about all things. And I said, oh, and you need to tune in tomorrow, either live or you can watch the recording of this event, because this fabulous discovery was made. And again, Bob, this goes back to what you all built many, many years ago at Stout. And I told the students, one of the most powerful things that I get to do as a chancellor is interact with students on a daily basis, but I also get to interact with our students of yesterday. And so the stories of the alums that I hear, and the why behind Stout, and this is what I was saying to prospective students, why they came to Stout for the education. But then when I speak with somebody like Bob and talk about this type of project, right, it is what what was that extended experience at Stout? Who were they, with whom were they connected? Who did they form relationships with? What became especially meaningful for them at the time they were at Stout? What were those great moments of celebration and what were those great moments of loss, right? And then what created meaning for them as students in Stout? And then why do they stay connected and why do they continue to build at Stout with recognition and events like today? And so the Stout story really extends beyond the classroom. That learning may have brought students to Stout, but then that learning and expands both inside and outside of the classroom is so impactful. And it takes a lot of people to make something like this happen. So it takes that idea of how you create something like this, but then the committee that remains involved with this work, Heather and her outstanding work in the archives, Darren and his belief in this project, but the belief in what this building represents. And if you want to talk to anybody about what a student center means to the life and heart and energy of a campus, just talk to Darren with Tucky, because he will tell you. And so to have something like this embedded at the heart of the MSC really speaks to why this building is so important, not just to our campus, not just to the infrastructure, but to the student experience. And I'm reminded of that every time I walk into the building. It is part of the heartbeat, right, of our campus. It's where people come together, it's where relationships are formed, and it's where we remember and we celebrate. So, my thanks to everybody who is involved in this project, the history of this project, and where we are today. And thank you for allowing us to celebrate the story of Charles Cummings. So with that, I'll turn it over to the people who are going to tell the rest of the story. Darren, thank you.
Thank you, Chancellor Frank, and thank you for warning them, because I will talk about it. Okay, I'm here to give you a little history of our Hall of Heroes project. If you have read some of the press release information leading up to today's ceremony, you may have learned that we dedicated our memorial wall in October of 2012. But the story does not start there. It goes back quite a ways. The year was 1957. The campus was engaged in an effort to assemble the names of Stout's fallen in advance of the opening of the first Memorial Student Center, which today serves as the Communications Technology Building. In fact, it was 65 years ago this month that reference librarian Beulah Howlison sent a memo to President Fricklin indicating that despite their best efforts, a comprehensive list of those from the Stout community that fell in the military service was simply unreachable at that time. It was a frustrating reality of incomplete and unattainable records of that time. And while President Fricklin asked that the search for their names continue, the Memorial Student Center opened and was dedicated in 1959 with a plaque that reads, Memorial Student Center dedicated to the students of Stout State College who died in war that others may live. That plaque was remounted in 1985 outside this building when this building opened and is within sight of the memorial wall that we will expand today. Now, fast forward to the spring of 2012. Alumni representing Sigma Tau Gamma from the early 1960s created a scholarship in memory of Lieutenant John Abrams, a 1962 alumnus, who died in Vietnam in 1968. These former classmates who started the Abrams Scholarship Fund inquired about honoring Abrams with a plaque. The campus was certainly receptive to this idea, and while we worked on this with this group to honor John Abrams, it was discovered that a larger opportunity was within reach. Before his retirement, archivist Kevin Thory had made considerable progress in developing a more complete list of alumni that had fallen in military service. Current archivist Heather Steckline continued Kevin's work and felt we could develop a comprehensive listing of Stout's fallen service members. A committee was formed and work began to realize a long-desired goal. A team of over 35 people helped make the memorial display a reality. On October 18th, 2013, it was a cold homecoming weekend, the Hall of Heroes Memorial was unveiled to the campus, the community, the alumni, and assembled family members. It was a special day for the campus and for this building. The Memorial Student Center was made more complete with the dedication of the memorial wall. The publicity of that day and the subsequent word of mouth generated some leads and stories, and all that indicated that our work was not done. The archives team went to work following up on the new leads and verifying information. A team of over 20 people this time worked to put together a second ceremony. On November 11, 2015, 4 more Stout veterans were inducted to the Hall of Heroes, and about a half dozen existing plaques were updated with photographs. That was a big deal. All of our heroes now have a picture with their name. The second ceremony was once again very special and important to our campus community. As the ceremony concluded and attendees milled about, reading plaques, engaging in fellowship and conversation, I stood back with my friend and colleague Heather Steckline, and we enjoyed the scene in front of us. And I leaned over to Heather and I said, "Heather, we did good work today." And she replied, "Yes, today was very nice." Did I tell you I have credible leads on Stout alumni from the Spanish-American War? We weren't even done, and Heather was on to the next opportunity. And that was the start of the process that led to today's ceremony. In a moment, I will turn over the podium to Heather, and she will take over the story from there. Before that, I need to take a moment to acknowledge and thank a remarkable team of people that made today possible. Our ceremony committee, which includes Jerry Poling from Marketing and Communications, Jen Rudiger from University Advancement, Heather Steckline from Archives and the University Research Center, and myself. Our team from Marketing and Communications that handled the plaque design and printing and slideshow development, story development, press releases, and social media outreach, Cheryl Kais, AJ Lytle, Rachel Huggerson, Kay Walters, Jerry Poling. Thank you to our install team of Josh Schramm and Brandon Kelly from Facilities Management, and our vendor partners, Sue Bonus from Intex Exhibits and Jessica Stiles from Allegra Printing and Marketing. I would be remiss not to thank my own department, our conference and events team, our custodial team, our MSE student designers, our event technology crew are providing the live stream today, and the recording for those that could not be here. I thank you to our veterans coordinator, Chris Engen, and the UW-Stout Veterans Club for their support and inclusion in this week's events leading up to Veterans Day. And as you will learn in a moment, University Archives researchers have put hours and hours, not only into the name, researching the name and verifying today's honoree, but to find a picture and weave together details that captures the story. The archives teams includes Rebecca Kuski, students DJ Walker, Ingmar Emerson, Brian Irish, and Alex Owens, all under the leadership of Archivist and Area Research Center Director Heather Steckline. I need to once again acknowledge the 1960 members of Sigma Tau Gamma, whose idea of honoring a classmate grew into the memorial that is being celebrated and added to today on this Veterans Day. And lastly, the family members. In the two previous ceremonies, we were very fortunate to find and invite and get to know family members of our honorees. We have always been humbled by how gracious the families are when we find and make contact with them, and today is no different. I want to personally thank Chris for his patience with all my texts and emails as I tried to explain to him the nearly unreal story of how we were trying to honor his great-great-uncle from the Spanish-American War. Thank you both for being here today. There is no doubt that this project was once again a labor of love, honor, and determined focus for everyone involved. And with that, I would like to welcome Archivist and Area Research Center Director Heather Steckline to the podium to provide you some insight on how her team brings our honorees to light.
Thank you, Darren. So I want to explain the process that we go through in order to create the plaques that honor all of these individuals. So, as Darren already told you, we have a committee on campus that works to figure out, we get the leads and we try to figure out what their Stout connection is and what the circumstances of their military service was. We also work very hard to standardize the content so that everyone gets the same attention on the Hall of Heroes. So that includes their rank, their first name, first and last name, a photograph, their service branch and a death date, and then we try to get biographical information to be as standardized as possible as well so that everyone's represented well. That includes a birth date and information about their youth. Where did they grow up? How might they have ended up on our campus? Then we look at their Stout story. In many cases, they were a Stout student who was drafted or a Stout alumnus who enlisted. In other cases, they were actually Stout faculty or staff members. We decided as a committee that any connection to Stout is worth honoring because every loss to our community, whether it's a staff member or a student, is significant. And finally, the circumstances of their death. Where did they die? How did they die? And then where were they buried or memorialized? In some cases, we weren't able to find remains, and so there is a memorial for the person. We want our community to have the possibility of, if they see that plaque and they are wanting to honor that individual and they know that they'll be near that gravesite or that memorial, they'll be able to actually visit it. So the first thing, other thing I'll note, I chose Hjalmar Molner's plaque intentionally. And Hjalmar Molner was one of those half dozen individuals in 2013 who we didn't have a picture for. We just had an Army SEAL. His nephew stepped forward a few weeks after we put up the Hall of Heroes and gave me a folder of materials, including the telegram that his family received saying that he was missing in action, including information, letters he wrote back and forth with his relatives about how excited he was to finally be a pilot, his lifelong dream, and then a picture of him in his pilot gear. So it was such an honor to be able to include his picture in the plaque the way that he would have wanted to be seen. We've also had Jerry Irwin's family give us a picture of him in his flight suit. So these additions to the Hall of Heroes continue to grow, and the project never ends, as Darren has already said. So with Charles Cummings, what happened is, yes, we were already aware that he was likely going to be an honoree in 2015, but we didn't have all of the details that we needed for his plaque. So I'm going to walk you through the process that we went through in order to substantiate him and honor him today. First of all, we needed to establish a Stout connection. We had an idea that he had graduated from Stout in 1895. But there's a complication there where Stout was not yet a university at the time. So this is what Stout looked like in 1895. That building with the clock tower on top of it is where Bowman Hall now stands. And so what you're seeing is a two-part school. On the right-hand side, you're seeing a high school. And this was, at the time, it was relatively rare in this area to graduate from high school. So already at that, we were considered an institution of higher learning in the 1890s. But on the left-hand side, you see this thing called the Stout Manual Training School. In fact, Bowman Hall still says Stout Manual Training School on the front of it. And this was Senator Stout's idea of what our school should be. His vision was that in addition to the standard curriculum that you would expect in a public school, the Menominee School District would also offer focused training in domestic arts and in industrial education and industrial arts. And so the interior of the building, this is what the interior of the two buildings look like. The upper picture shows you a standard lecture hall, which would have been in that smaller building. So you're taking your reading, your writing, your arithmetic, maybe even a little Greek or Latin. And then part of your day is also spent in these intensive laboratories where you're learning wood turning, you're learning foundry, you're learning apparel design, you're learning dietetics. All of those things were happening on our campus in this really revolutionary way in the 1890s. Another classroom that Charles Cummings likely sat in was our mechanical drawing classroom. And one of our mechanical drawing faculty members in the early 1890s was Mary Jane Elizabeth Coulter. She is world-renowned, internationally known architect who designed many of the structures that are most notable in the Grand Canyon National Park. And she was probably one of his teachers. We don't know for sure whether she was one of his teachers because on February 2nd, 1897, a fire started in the boiler room on that clock tower building and our campus burned to the ground. So all of our photographs of campus, any yearbooks, any newspapers, anything that was documenting the student records, anything that was documenting the day-to-day life was lost. Everything that I'm showing you from the previous slides of our campus is one surviving brochure of our campus from 1894. So that's how we know what it looked like. And a few glass plate negatives in our collection. But beyond that, it's really hard for us to substantiate who was here. Luckily, someone in the early 1900s, about 1903, compiled a list of graduates of the Stout Manual Training School. And so on the left, you see our first graduating class, and on the right, you see the class of 1895. which again, at the turn of the 20th century, Charles Cummings is the second name listed, and he's already listed as deceased. That was the thing that kind of tipped me off that something's interesting here. Then we were able to substantiate his military service by looking at the Ludington Guard records. We have the records of a group that was founded in this area. It was founded by Civil War veterans who wanted to keep a military presence in our community, and so they founded this group. You may have heard of the Ludington Guard Band, which I play in every summer. That's a descendant of this group. Our current National Guard unit is a descendant of that group. And Company H, where Cummings and all of our World War I veterans that are on this wall also served, are a descendant of the Ludington Guard. So we have their records, and we see Charles V. Cummings is listed as a private, and it talks about how he's fair-skinned, blue eyes, dark hair. It mentions that he was single at the time of enlistment, and it also says that he was a teacher. That was Senator Stout's big vision, was that the people who learned these manual training skills would go out and disseminate that information in the community, and we're seeing evidence here that Charles Cummings was doing that. So that led to us looking up his death announcement. Now that we knew what his death date was, we were able to look in the Dunn County News. And it talks about, in the middle of this article, it says, he graduated from Menominee High School class of 1895. So Menominee High School was the Stout Manual Training Schools. And it talks about how his standings in examinations were very good, percentages of 95, 97, 98, looking like a straight A student. So now that we know he graduated in 1895, we can look at his graduation ceremony. And what we find out is that he received his diploma straight from the hands of James Huff Stout in the Mabel Tainer Theater. He walked across the stage and received his diploma. In the middle column, we learn that right before he received his diploma, he was the last person to speak because he was the valedictorian of his class. And his speech was called, I believe it was America's Needs. And then on the right-hand side is the last thing. All of this is part of the same article in the Dunn County News. And it was really common in the 1890s to 19-teens, for people to write poems predicting what was going to happen with their classmates. And so it's written in the voice of a narrator 25, 30 years down the road. What are they like? And what we see in this one, and it's going to be hard for me to read, sorry, is they say, the narrator says, "Who is he with student air, on whose face is graved suggestion of mathematics' subtle stare? Why, that's Charlie, didn't recognize? Haven't heard of the great professor, Wisconsin's boast and Harvard's prize? For they say that he is a possessor of a new mathematical scheme that does away with multiplication and additions like a dream." So, he was a huge nerd. And apparently his classmates called him Charlie. But this is how archival research works sometimes. You know, we have these bits and pieces of putting together someone's story, and it also helps us solidify what a loss this was, what a promising individual this was that we lost. So 3 years after his graduation ceremony, Charles Cummings is standing on the front steps somewhere in this picture in 1898 with his unit getting ready to deploy to the Spanish-American War. And this article lists him along with one of his Stout classmates in the list of soldiers who are being deployed. They were veterans from the area, part of that Ludington Guard group, actually were there on hand. And the article remarks that the veterans who were there, who were present that day, had the look of a special kind of understanding because they'd served in the Civil War. And they knew what these soldiers were going to be encountering. And I just wanted to acknowledge at this point, you know, all the veterans that are here, all the current service members that are here, thank you for your service. We know that your service lasts a lifetime. So what happens with the company here is that the veterans and the community marched them down the street to the train depot, and they head to Milwaukee. And then from there, they head to Georgia for training, and then they headed to Puerto Rico for service. We do have a few pictures of Company H serving during the Spanish-American War. But again, these pictures are unidentified. We don't know which member of the troop is actually Cummings. So when we're thinking about having a plaque, all of these other plaques, we move to heaven and earth to have individual pictures on them. And so how do we, one of the things I talked about with Darren was potentially having just the picture of the whole unit on the plaque. That might have been what we would have been able to do. Finally, the last piece of substantiation we needed was, where is he buried? And we have this Dunn County News article discussing how Charles Cummings died 174 years ago this past Wednesday, in November 9th. Or 124, thank you. 124 years ago. Next year will be his 125th year, the 125th anniversary of his death. And so he dies in November, and he was buried along with the other soldiers who died in the same typhoid epidemic in Puerto Rico. And so in the spring, his remains were recovered and brought by steamship, Romania, back to the United States, and then put on the same railroad back to Menominee. And so what we see is that same group of people who sent him away the previous spring, about a year earlier, were there to receive his body. And they met them at the depot. The Ludington Guard Band played. The veterans were there. The soldiers who had survived the war were there to greet him as well. And the hearses of all of the soldiers proceeded back to the Mabel Tainer Theater, where the community mourned together. And then Charles Cummings was brought back to his hometown of Fall Creek, where there was a private celebration with his family, and he was buried in the cemetery. So that leads us to the last piece of the plaque, which is we don't have an individual photograph of him. Enter DJ Walker, who's in the front row here. So I received an email from his program advisor, Dr. Tina Lee, and she said, I have this promising student who is interested in doing archives or museum work. Do you have some time to welcome him for a short internship in the archives? And I said, sure. So when DJ came, we talked about the kinds of things that he might want to do for his internship, and we settled on the idea of doing a blog post and a small exhibit outside the archives. And as we looked at the collections that he might want to explore, DJ, being an active service member, locked into the Ludington Guard and Company H. And DJ wrote a great blog post tracing the community of Company, the legacy of the Ludington Guard and Company H. And I'll have these out for you. There's a QR code that can take you to his blog post, and you're always welcome to come up to the fifth floor of the library outside the archives is his exhibit. So as DJ began his project, I said, by the way, we have this individual, we have all these group shots, but we have this individual, and we haven't been able to substantiate him. If you're able to find his picture, please, just let me know. 2 weeks later, he walks into my office with this clipping. It was in a folder that was labeled something like supplemental newspaper insert or something like that. And there's Charles Cummings. So what we were able to do with that image is another student worker of mine, Ingmar Amberson, who's in the audience, did a very high resolution scan that we now have available for this plaque, and so we now have all the pieces in place. I want to thank everyone who has helped me with substantiating everything for Charles Cummings in order to be able to have the plaque today. And I also want to welcome anyone who has additional information, photographs, or even new suggestions for people who we've missed in the Hall of Heroes, because as Darren has indicated, this is a never-ending project, and there's so much more to do. So we really appreciate any assistance from family, friends, and community members who know more that we can add to this wall. So with that, I'm going to introduce DJ Walker and Chris Steensland to come up and officially induct Charles V. Cummings to the Stout Hall of Heroes. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is DJ Walker, and as mentioned by Heather, I had the honor of contributing to this project, and I'm very humbled to take part in the ceremony today. As mentioned, I am joined at the podium by Chris Steensland, and he was the great-great-nephew of Charles V. Cummings. Chris, we're so glad to have you here today. Before we formally induct Charles Cummings by reading his plaque into the record, I want to present you with a replica of the plaque as a keepsake for your family. And now the introduction and induction of Charles V. Cummings. Corporal Charles V. Cummings was born on February 14th, 1876 in Springbrook, Wisconsin. He graduated from the Stout Manual Training School in 1895. His classmates knew him as Charlie and predicted that he would become a college mathematics professor. He was an outstanding student, and he presented the valedictory address, America's Needs, at the Stout commencement on June 13th, 1895. He enlisted in the Army during the Spanish-American War and served in Company H of the 3rd Wisconsin Infantry. He died in Ponce, Puerto Rico on November 9th, 1898, during a typhoid fever outbreak. In April 1899, his remains were greeted at the Menominee train depot by a large group of citizens, the Ludington Guard Band, and a full escort of Company H members and veterans. He was buried with full military honors at Forest Center Evergreen Cemetery in Fall City, Menominee. At this point, I will turn it back over to Darren Witucky to conclude the ceremony.
All right. Thank you, DJ and Chris. Thank you, Heather. All right, so we're at the point now. DJ will escort Chris and Kurt to the memorial display for the unveiling. We ask that the rest of the crowd wait and follow behind. Afterwards, we can return to this area for some conversation and fellowship accompanied by beverages and sweet treats provided by University Catering. And lastly, I want to announce at noon, the clock tower bells will toll in honor of Charles V. Cummings. Okay, DJ.